Okay, so this is going to be a great show today, Jens. We have one of our best friends in the industry by far. He's worked with us on a million things. We always go to Genghis Cohen together, Cantors.
Those people in LA know those places.
Yeah, so let's just do this, man. This is going to be amazing. People really should check this out. Bruce, how you doing, man?
Yep. Very good. Friend of Zacuto here.
Good to see you, mate. So today, let's talk about Rachel. I always forget about her.
Yeah, no, you didn't forget this time. That's
Yeah,
good.
really.
Hey, Rachel, how's it
Our
going?
social media marketing
Director.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you to the couple of people who've already got a couple questions up here. This is a Q&A, so we are relying on your questions. So if you've got anything you want to know about any of the films we're talking about or about working in the industry in general, type them in the chat. I will read them off to Bruce. And let's get started.
We're going to be showing various different clips of things that Bruce has worked on, and then we'll start fielding questions from those exact things. Obviously, we're going to start with 2001. We're going to go back to the beginning here, and let's show a clip from 2001, and Bruce, you can tell us what's going on here.
Man, I still get goosebumps when I watch that. It's still like the best effects that I've seen. I mean, still to this day, it's still it's so amazing.
That holds up, man. You look at that, just all those shots, the computer screens, everything. How old were you?
I was hired on the movie at the age of 19, and I worked on it for 2.5 years. And it was basically my film school. So it's great to have an experience like that, a learning experience, and then having a screen credit at the end of it. So yeah, pretty lucky.
What's happening here?
Space station.
That's on the interior of the space station set. The floor of the set just sloped up to the end, and this is kind of the end.
Okay, this is amazing. My God, how do you even build something like that?
Well, that was built by Vickers Aircraft, so it was built by an aviation company. And as you can see, it's a Ferris wheel. But what you don't really see there until you take a closer look is for each one of those screens for the readouts, there's a 60-millimeter projector that's also going around in circles as the set travels around.
But back then, you had really thick CRTs and a different aspect ratio than you probably wanted to use, right? So you had to rear screen film the footage, the content first, and then a rear screen project it onto like a ground glass type frosted glass?
Yeah, yes, it was on back projection material. But photographing a television screen back in those days was really a problem.
Well, and they look like crap too. That was the other thing. The film looks beautiful. Yeah. Oh my God, look! You're painting with light.
Oh wow! Can you maybe list some of the things for our audience of the things that you did for the film?
Well, the first year and a half was, actually the first year was spent doing readouts, and there was specific readouts that we had in the film, but there were also a bunch of junk readouts. Because there were so many screens, we had to come up with an enormous amount of material because the takes were very long. And so these screens had to be running and showing technical looking things. So when I was first hired on the movie, I was hired as an animation artist, but then they found out that I could shoot animation. And what this did, when you're doing animation, the artists, they do the artwork and then they write a dope sheet. And the dope sheet tells the cameraman how to shoot the scene. Well, in my case, I could jump the dope sheet section of the work because I would produce the artwork and then I'd take it under the animation camera and improvise. Stanley always said we want lots of razzle dazzle in the readout, so there's a lot of flashing on and off and doing dissolves, and I could do all those on the fly. So that was a start. And then we got into the more specific readouts, which were landings and the AE-35 unit, which was in that clip, you saw an X-ray in motion.
Right.
Then there is the end sequence with the slit scan and all the visual eye candy at the end of the movie.
I got a question. What about Stanley? I mean, what does he like to work with?
Yeah, I remember that note. You showed us a note from him once. What did it say again?
Well, there was a note to me personally, which was it said, "You cowardly bastards ran away from the from facing the music last night. I'll be expecting to hear from you in the morning."
Wow.
And then there was another one threatening to when they were making a sequel, he was very unhappy about that. Stanley was, I had the experience for 2.5 years of having to sit in a room with him and defend my work. In the daily session, and he used to sit there. It was like a theater, but he would sit in front in a separate chair, and he had this thing called a beer mug, and what it was a Selson motor that controlled the focus of the projector. So he was tired of like yelling up to the booth, "Run through focus," So he would be able to sit there and refocus the image himself. He was a very sweet human being. He was very nice to me. But, when it came to his movie, he was totally ruthless. There were times, I remember a call I got once. I'd been sick for a couple of days, and he threatened to get an ambulance to my house and have me come in and shoot animation off a gurney. So
Wow.
it was my first feature film, so I thought all movies were like this, But
Wait, they all are, aren't they?
Not exactly.
I love this scene. So great. I remember how shocking this was when I first watched it, because this is the first time you ever saw what a Klingon really looked like, because this was the first Star Trek movie, and prior to that they just had grease paint on their face.
Right.
So I mean, when that movie came out, I was waiting for that thing for years.
That was their first look at what we think of as Klingons now.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So explain to us what you did there.
Well, I was originally up for being the director of photography on the whole movie, because I was actually working on a TV series at Paramount. They were going to reboot the TV series, and then they changed it over to being a feature film, and I didn't really have enough experience to do that. Although I'd shot many features, but that's a big studio picture. But then Robert Wise asked me to come in and shoot the first 5 minutes of the movie at a later date. This was a great experience, to work with Robert Wise, who I was a huge fan of.
I mean, you go from Stanley Kubrick to Bob Wise. I mean, it's like these are two of the greatest directors of all time.
Yes, I was a DP on that scene, and so I got the experience of working with Robert Wise as a director.
Got it.
What's he like to work with?
He was very, very kind of normal, and watching him direct the Klingons, he would kind of act out what they were going to do. Okay, we'll do this, and here comes the explosion. Oh, watch out. It's really interesting to watch the different directing styles of different people, but that's like an on-set thing. What you can't see when you work with a great director is what's going on in their mind, and that's where all the magic comes from.
What's Gene Roddenberry like?
He was fantastic, and he was the reason that I was hired on that project. I had a meeting with him, and he really liked me and what I had to say about the project, and I remember getting this huge gallon of scotch from him at Christmas, and I think that lasted in my closet for at least 10 years, I think.
So let me ask you this about that scene. So it kind of set the tone for the rest of the series and movies about kind of how Klingon ships look and feel inside. How much was his direction to you as to the look and all that, and how much was art department, how much was you? You know, that mix, I guess, is what people always kind of want to know.
Well, it was a great set, and I think it was designed by John Vallone, who was the art director on that whole movie. You know, I always look for opportunities in the set to have the set light itself. So I think I asked John, you know, I said, well, I'd like a panel here that I can have a light come through, and you know, so it was a collaboration about the way it was lit, and I used a lot of underlighting. I like to, so I lit through his graded floors and that kind of stuff, you know.
Right, that helps that villain kind of feel.
Oh, I loved it, and every movie thereafter, when you see Klingons in their ships, that's the lighting scheme that's basically used.
Yeah.
I actually have a quick question. So the movies that you were somehow doing in a row here, 2001, Star Trek, Star Wars, like they're very spacey. They all, even though have a very different look, they all have this vibe. Do you think that was just a product of the time of what movies were coming out, or did your work on one directly lead to the next one?
I think in my career, I've tried to shed the expectation of what you do. Oh, you do this, you know. It's like when I was a commercial director, people say, well, we see ice cream on your reel, but we're doing frozen yogurt, so we're not sure that you can handle this particular subject, you know. So I think science fiction followed me more than I followed it, you know. Science fiction is not my favorite genre, although a lot of the films I've worked on are some of my favorite movies. So.
I know that Jens walks around and always says, oh, his claim to fame is he blew up the Death Star.
No, let me explain that. So how I met Bruce at NAB is we got chatting about the screening we were doing there, and I just said, so what are some of your credits? He goes, oh, I'm the guy who blew up the Death Star. So that's how we were introduced.
Let's bring up some of the Star Wars photos, and Bruce, you can talk to us about what you did in that clip that we saw.
Okay, well, this shot that you're looking at right now is a Death Star explosion. I'm not sure if it's the actual one that ended up in the picture, but one of the remarkable things is you can see the grip in the foreground, and our entire fire control was in his hand there, which was like a portable fire extinguisher. and I do remember, you know, we started off with fairly small explosions, but we got to this stage at Producer Studio. You know, it was very much simpler days. I can remember wiping burning napalm off my arm at one point. But basically what you've got there is you've got the camera on the floor looking directly upwards, being protected by a sheet of plywood on two sawhorses, and there's a hole cut in the wood and a sheet of glass laid over it. And the explosion's being set off directly over the lens, which is what gives it its zero-G look. And there's above it, which you can't see, is the blue screen, which is being lit by I think 8 arc lights, which you can see in the foreground. Now we don't see arcs on set very much anymore, but it's very, very powerful light and very steady. It was direct current, so you could shoot at high speed without it flickering at all.
People need to know that an arc light actually has a fire going on in there. It's like a welding torch or something.
It is.
So a lot of these things are done digitally these days, but so I just wanted to clarify for people, because you've explained this to me before, the zero-G thing is you have to kind of look up at it because you need the thing to spread out evenly. If we were to shoot at it looking horizontally, the sparks would fall down to the side. It wouldn't look like an even explosion.
It would look like a mushroom cloud, you know.
All right, let's talk about when the that sonic wave, I'm going to call it, but
Oh,
it's that, I know you hate
that controversy of the ring, the donut, or whatever we call it.
Well, I worked on a movie called Star Wars, and later on, this movie was renamed as Episode 4. And at that point, George had decided to do a lot of CG animation in it. You know, he hadn't had time or money or the technology at the time to be able to do it. And one of the things that they did was they put this ring around my explosion, which yes, was a little offensive.
But now the Alderaan explosion, was that your work as well?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And he also added a donut to that, Lucas did, right?
I think there's a photo there of me rigging an X-Wing.
nice mustache.
Wait, is that you?
Thank you, yes. Yeah, that's me.
Wow.
That was like,
And,
and then when he walked off set, he walked right onto a porno set.
Well, it was the 70s, you know.
I had 3 E-fans hooked up in a row and in a long tube with what's known as an egg crate at the end of it. So that normally when you have a fan and you put it, the air is is rotating in vortices. So we had the fans lined up and baffled so that the air coming out of it was perfectly straight. And then we would blow up the ship and shoot it with high-speed cameras.
Wow. Now, one thing we need to say is that, nowadays we have 9 million BTS photos, videos, everything. But when you go back to the 70s, 80s, we don't even have that many BTS images. And I know that's something that you and I talk about a lot, Bruce.
Right.
Is that it was film. You had to have a guy with a camera. It wasn't like you whip out your phone and you go bam.
Well, most films even back then had a production still camera guy, but that was more for the live action stuff, not necessarily the FX crew, right?
Yes, and it was mostly pictures of the stars or the director working with the stars, But yeah, BTS wasn't a thing. Now, if you shoot something, you have to be seen shooting that something as well as just shooting it.
Production
I
office
have
many
a question
times.
here, guys. From Brian, who says that Star Wars is a film known to have created not only a dedicated effects department, but also techniques never attempted before. Any particular effect or shot that you developed yourself that we can see in the film?
Well, the zero-G explosion was probably my biggest contribution to it. The motion control that was being developed for the film is probably the signature visual effect of Star Wars and its contribution to visual effects. But it was very difficult to develop this system. And when George came back from England, he was very unsatisfied because they hadn't shot a frame of the visual effects yet. So in desperation, I was called up again. I'd seen George at the beginning of the movie to talk about the visual effects generally for the movie. But so he came back, and he wanted me to shoot puppeteers in black velvet suits and black rods, and he wanted to fly these ships in front of the lens and do puppetry just to get very fast work. But of course that didn't work out. So I then became this pyrotechnic unit and shot a lot of explosions for the movie.
What's George like to work with?
George was great. He was, very into making his own movie. He invented a technique for the visual effects that I'd never seen before, which is called a rip-o-matic. And basically he got footage from Tora, Tora, Tora and Dam Busters and these World War II movies, and he cut his dogfight sequence out of footage from those. So he knew that he needed 17 frames of a ship going left to right and taking a dive. You can't shoot extra footage while you're doing visual effects. You've got to know exactly what you want. So he was very, very organized, and I like that.
Do you think we can merge with this memory bit? Yes. Uh-oh, we've got company.
I recognize her.
Damn it!
I mean, I still love the look of that, man. I wish that the new Tron looked like that Tron. That is a new invention of a look.
I haven't seen anything like that before.
When people talk about Blade Runner, that was a new invention of a look. Bruce, that is a really cool movie. I loved that movie when it came out. I watched it. I was like, wow. It was like watching Planet of the Apes for me. It was brand new.
This was all shot in black, and that was one of the contributions I made to the movie. Was originally they wanted to do this as a process that was shot in a white limbo, and the problem with the white limbo is you have to light up all the areas that you're not even going to see. Or that you don't need. By shooting it in black, if there was an area at the top of the frame, you didn't have to light it because all you needed to do was light the actual characters and where they were. So this is one of the sets that was actually in live action. And what you can see there is I'm holding up a cell. In other words, every frame of film that I shot, they blew up onto, like a 14-inch Kodalith negative like this. And then with negative and positive matting and putting them on the animation stand with diffusion filters and colored gels. That's how the cyberspace scenes were done.
So it's old school.
Yeah, it's very much old school. But the biggest challenge in the movie was making the live action, and then the live action in the cyber world, and the actual first CG animation to all kind of blend. But you can see in that picture, you can see these very fine lines on some of the suits. And that was one of the biggest problems, that every frame of the film that I shot had to be sharp. It had to have infinite depth of field. It had to be shot with a very, very narrow shutter angle, because if those lines went into motion blur, they disappeared off the Kodalith negative. So we were kind of welding with light. We had massive amounts of light, and Burbank Water and Power called the studio twice to say they were going to shut us down if we didn't back off a little bit.
So it was hot on that set.
It was very hot and black.
Question here from Moses Wilson, who says, when you're in the process of shooting a film, do you actually have a sense of how sophisticated VFX is meshing with the script? It seems like it's such a separate experience in space that it could be hard to do.
Well, I think that's the director's job on a movie like this, is that they have to turn the script into the visuals. And that's usually done in a storyboard sequence. So when you are doing the effects, you pretty much know what you're doing, and then it becomes much more of a mechanical process. But I see lots of movies. I remember when the second Jurassic Park came out, they said, oh, well, we don't want the story to get in the way of the visual effects. And I thought, oh my God, what have we come to? So,
it defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
When you watch the dailies, you don't really see the effect meshed with it at that time, and there's that disconnect, is what I got out of his question. But beforehand, you've probably done tests with live action and combined them so the director has an idea of what it would look like and can visualize that when watching dailies, right?
Yeah, well, Steve Lisberger was, he came from animation, so it was always going to be like an animation movie. So he was very familiar with the technique and how this was going to get done. And we did shoot a proof of concept for Disney, and we shot Deborah Harry, who was originally up for the part of Yuri, and we shot it in white limbo, and they took all the way through the post process and the animation, and I guess it was a test for me as well, and Deborah Harry didn't get the part, but I guess I did.
I mean, one thing that's worth mentioning is that, and it kind of goes back to Moses's question, is that when you shot on film, there was that you never really knew what you got. You kind of had to have a large imagination because, you didn't have that monitor there, and nowadays it's so much different. You probably could do matting and whatnot and drop it in just for the monitor, to see it and then take it away and shoot it raw.
The only people that really saw the image before the dailies, actually the only person was the operator. because there was no video assist. So he was a very trusted guy, so everyone turns to him and say, "Do we got it?" And now, everybody's looking at the screen. Everybody's got some kind of criticism of what we got. It was always a miracle to me when this stuff came out in the lab, and oh wow, we got an image on the film. It's amazing.
Obviously,
another
Blade Runner.
Yeah, another sci-fi classic there.
Now, this is an interesting story because I know you've told me this before, but tell us what you did in that scenario.
Bottom line was I came to America for the first time after 2001 in 1968 to work for Doug Trumbull, who had been hired on Antonioni's Zabriskie Point. And the scene at the end of the movie where the whole world blows up, we went out to the desert and we shot high-speed footage of thousands of pounds of napalm being let off in these giant crucibles. And they never used the footage in the movie, but then 12 years later, Doug found these explosions, and Ridley was looking for a way to spice up the opening shot of the movie, and they used our explosions in Blade Runner.
Okay, that's another classic. Tell us about what you did there, Bruce.
Well, I had a very strange request from the directors on that movie to make the visual effects look really cheesy, and I think we did a pretty good job of it. Except I think I would have liked to have seen the wires on some of the flying shots, holding up the airplane, but I missed an opportunity because I actually hung the model upside down, so the wires were underneath the airplane, and then he switched the camera over as well. So you're never looking for wires underneath an object, only holding them up. So the runway was about 60 feet long, and then we had like a background skylight of the Chicago airport, rigged up little Christmas tree lights behind it. And then to make it look like it was big, instead of lighting it generally, I put all these little pools of light, so it looked like they were going in and out of their landing lights. So, that airplane was a little under 6 feet long.
Good size.
Yeah, big.
Yeah. Well, with miniatures, the bigger the miniature, the better. That's the rule of thumb.
What are we doing out here in this godforsaken road? Everyone's over there.
I've never missed a plane yet.
August in Vegas, I had met Terry Gilliam through Elliot Rosenblatt, who they asked me to come in. I'm not sure what to shoot, but I managed to talk my way into being the second unit director cameraman on that. Back in the late 60s, I had read Fear and Loathing. It was a book that was in Peter Fonda's office, and it was kind of required reading by the counterculture back in those days. The cars were characters in the book. The red shark and the gray whale. One of the problems shooting that action scene is action usually plays better on longer lenses. And Terry with really the longest lens that you could use in the movie was a 32. So everything had to be shot on wide lenses. So it meant that the action had to be much closer to the camera than normally when he's shooting an action sequence. It was a lot of fun.
What about Terry Gilliam?
Terry was fantastic. You know, he's always been one of my favorite zany directors. You know, I loved Time Bandits, and I love Brazil. Brazil's one of my favorite movies, you know, visually. And he's incredible. He's just like has a vision. And he would draw us little storyboards on napkins, which you obviously you'd hang on to because they were Terry Gilliam originals.
So was Hunter Thompson on set?
He was. I think that was one of the hardest set of rights to nail down for a movie, because I think he'd been in bars all over the world selling the rights to different people on different occasions, you know, so everybody seemed to think that they owned the rights to that book, you know.
All right, Bruce, this was so awesome. Thanks for doing this show, man, and we'll be talking real soon.
Sounds great. Cheers.
Cheers.